In this episode, we're going to take the alert stream that shows up on a screen and turn it into a response system that actually works day after day, even when the team is tired or the organization is under pressure. When learners first imagine alert response, they often picture dramatic moments where someone spots a serious warning and saves the day, but most real environments succeed or fail in the quiet routine of handling hundreds of small decisions consistently. Timely response matters because security incidents usually get worse with time, yet speed without discipline can create mistakes and unnecessary disruption. Manageable response matters because a process that overwhelms people eventually collapses into backlog and avoidance, which is its own form of risk. Sustainable response matters because you want a security operations center, SOC, that improves over months, not a burst of effort that burns out and then drifts into chaos. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A practical way to understand timely alert response is to treat time as a resource you are spending, not a clock you are racing, because that mindset changes how you design the workflow. Speed is valuable when it reduces uncertainty early, prevents spread, and limits impact. But speed is harmful when it forces guesses or triggers actions that break business operations. Timely response begins with defining what timely means for different types of alerts, because a suspected active intrusion on a critical system deserves a different pace than a low-confidence anomaly on a low-impact device. Many teams formalize this as a service-level agreement, SLA, for response, but the deeper idea is simply that time expectations must match risk and must be achievable with the staffing and tooling you have. When time expectations are realistic, analysts can plan their work and leadership can measure performance without turning every day into an emergency. When time expectations are fantasy, people learn to ignore the numbers, and then the entire response program loses credibility. From there, manageable response starts with the intake step, because the way alerts enter the queue determines whether you are dealing with a controlled workload or a constant pileup. Intake should produce a clear, consistent record for each alert, including the essential facts and the reason it was flagged, so analysts do not waste time reconstructing the basic story. Intake also benefits from grouping related alerts so that multiple notifications about one underlying situation do not multiply work unnecessarily. A common mistake is allowing the queue to become a flat list where every alert looks equally urgent, because that forces analysts to spend mental energy sorting instead of investigating. Manageable intake uses basic classification and context to create order, which reduces cognitive load and prevents important signals from being buried. Even for beginners, the lesson is that queue health is part of security, because a disorganized queue is how a SOC becomes blind while still appearing busy. When the intake process is clean, every later step becomes faster and calmer. Once alerts are in the queue, the next best practice is a disciplined triage approach, because triage is where the team decides how much attention an alert deserves. Triage should be designed as a short, repeatable validation step that answers a small set of consistent questions, such as whether the identity is high risk, whether the asset is critical, whether the behavior is plausible, and whether there is supporting evidence that makes the alert coherent. The goal is not to prove everything during triage, because that would slow the team down and create backlog, but to separate likely true issues from likely noise and to identify what must be escalated quickly. A strong triage practice also includes a clear stopping point, meaning the analyst knows when they have enough to make a decision and move forward. Beginners sometimes think triage is shallow work, but it is actually one of the most important skills because it prevents the team from spending an hour on every alert. When triage is consistent, the team becomes faster without becoming reckless, and that is the balance sustainable response depends on. A key best practice for timely response is to make early actions reversible whenever possible, because reversibility allows you to move quickly without betting the business on an uncertain signal. Many security actions have side effects, such as disabling an account, blocking a connection, or isolating a system, and those can interrupt legitimate work or break critical services. Reversible actions might include increasing monitoring on an identity, temporarily requiring additional verification steps, or limiting a session's privileges while an investigation proceeds, depending on what the organization supports. The point is not that containment should be avoided, because containment is often necessary, but that the first steps should reduce uncertainty while minimizing collateral damage. This approach is also psychologically healthy for analysts, because they are less likely to freeze when they know they can act without causing irreversible harm. When reversibility is built into the workflow, you can respond quickly to high-impact signals while still respecting the reality that some alerts are false or ambiguous. Over time, reversible early action becomes one of the clearest ways to combine speed with trust. Manageable response also depends on clear ownership, because alerts do not resolve themselves and ambiguity about responsibility creates delays and duplicated work. Ownership starts with knowing who is responsible for triage, who is responsible for deeper investigation, and who is responsible for making business-impacting decisions when containment could disrupt operations. In some environments, analysts handle all steps, while in others, escalation to incident response or to system owners is necessary, but the principle is the same. Every alert must have an owner and a path to an outcome. Ownership should also include time-based handoff rules, such as what happens when a shift ends or when an alert remains unresolved past a threshold. Without clear ownership, work can sit in limbo, which quietly creates backlog and hides risk behind the illusion of activity. Beginners sometimes assume ownership is obvious, yet many real SOC problems come from unclear boundaries between teams. When ownership is explicit, response becomes faster because decisions do not wait for someone to decide who should decide. Sustainable alert response requires that you control alert volume through thoughtful design, not through heroic effort, because no team can outwork a broken detection pipeline forever. Volume control begins by ensuring alerts are built around behaviors that are specific enough to be meaningful, rather than generic anomaly messages that fire constantly. It also includes using enrichment so detections can focus on high-risk identities, high-criticality assets, and unusual contexts, which reduces the number of low-value alerts that reach humans. Another best practice is to introduce suppression or deduplication for known benign patterns, but only after you understand why they are benign, because suppressing blindly can hide real issues that share similar surface characteristics. Sustainable programs also recognize that some telemetry sources are inherently noisy, and they plan for that by applying stricter thresholds or by using those sources mainly for investigation context rather than for primary alert triggers. The goal is not to create silence, because silence can be dangerous, but to create a manageable flow where analysts can handle alerts with consistent quality. When volume is controlled through design, the SOC can maintain steady performance without burnout. Timely response also benefits from practicing decision speed in advance, because time is lost most often not to investigation complexity, but to hesitation and debate. A best practice is to define clear escalation criteria, such as what combinations of identity privilege and asset criticality justify immediate escalation, even when evidence is still developing. Another best practice is to define decision points, meaning the moments where the response must shift from validation to containment or from containment to broader incident handling. Decision points help because they reduce the number of choices an analyst must invent during stressful moments, and they create consistency across shifts and across individuals. This is where metrics like mean time to detect, MTTD, and mean time to respond, MTTR, can be useful, not as vanity statistics, but as indicators that the decision process is functioning. If MTTR is long, the cause is often unclear decision points, missing ownership, or insufficient context, not merely slow analysts. When you treat decision speed as a designed outcome, you can improve it without demanding impossible effort from individuals. Another best practice that supports manageability is building a clear documentation habit, because documentation prevents repeated work and supports clean handoffs. Documentation should capture what was observed, what was validated, what was ruled out, and what decision was made, along with the key evidence and pivots used. It should be concise enough that people actually do it, but complete enough that a different analyst could take over without redoing the entire investigation. Documentation also supports tuning and improvement because it reveals why alerts were false positives, why certain steps were slow, and where context was missing. Beginners sometimes view documentation as something you do after the work is done, but the healthier approach is to document as you go, because memory fades quickly and confusion grows when details are lost. A consistent documentation pattern also makes coaching easier, because leaders can review cases and identify where reasoning was strong and where it drifted. When documentation is treated as part of the response workflow, not an optional afterthought, the whole operation becomes more stable and less dependent on individual memory. Sustainability also depends on building a feedback loop that turns alert outcomes into improvements, because a SOC that does not learn becomes noisier and slower over time. Every resolved alert carries information, such as whether the detection logic was too broad, whether enrichment was missing, whether a data source was incomplete, or whether the response steps were unclear. A best practice is to capture these learnings in a lightweight way and to feed them into tuning, enrichment improvements, and process adjustments. This is not a once-a-year project, because small, frequent improvements prevent the system from drifting into unmanageable backlog. Feedback loops also help prevent alert fatigue, because analysts feel less trapped when they see that recurring noise leads to change rather than endless repetition. Another benefit is that improvements become evidence-based, since you can point to patterns and outcomes rather than relying on anecdotal frustration. Over time, the feedback loop becomes the engine of sustainability, turning daily work into continuous refinement rather than continuous exhaustion. A SOC that learns is a SOC that stays effective as threats and environments evolve. A related best practice is to design response workflows that respect human attention, because sustainable operations depend on cognitive health as much as on technical capability. Humans make better decisions when information is presented clearly, when tasks are sized appropriately, and when the process reduces unnecessary switching between tools and contexts. This means alerts should be written in a way that supports quick comprehension, with clear summaries and the right pivots. And it means the workflow should reduce repetitive steps through standardization. It also means analysts should not be expected to hold complex timelines in their head without support, because that increases error rates and slows work. Even small improvements, like consistent alert formatting and consistent case templates, can reduce mental friction and improve speed. Beginners sometimes underestimate how much time is lost to confusion and context switching, but those losses add up across hundreds of alerts. When response design acknowledges human limits, it becomes easier to sustain high-quality decisions without burnout. Timely response also requires that you plan for surge conditions, because incidents often create a sudden spike in alert volume and in urgency. A best practice is to have a surge mode mindset, meaning the team knows how to temporarily adjust priorities, broaden escalation, and focus on the highest impact signals when the queue grows quickly. Surge conditions also reveal whether your detection system is resilient, because noisy detections become catastrophic when the environment is already stressed. During surges, grouping and correlation become even more important, because handling alerts one by one can bury the signal in repetitive work. Another surge best practice is to rely on strong classification and ownership rules so that work is distributed efficiently rather than being concentrated on whoever happens to be watching at the moment. Surges are also when communication discipline matters most, because unclear messaging can waste time and create conflicting actions. When you design response processes with surge conditions in mind, you create a system that remains functional during the moments it is most needed. Manageable response is strengthened when you separate routine operational alerts from genuine security investigation alerts, because mixing them can overload analysts and blur priorities. Routine operational alerts might include expected system changes, service restarts, or known maintenance behaviors that are better handled by operational teams or by automated tracking, while security investigation alerts involve behavior patterns that suggest misuse or attack. This separation does not mean operational signals are unimportant, because operational instability can create security risk, but it does mean the response path should match the nature of the issue. If the SOC is forced to treat every operational anomaly as a security incident, it will drown and miss real attacks. Conversely, if security alerts are treated like routine tickets, urgent containment decisions can be delayed. A best practice is to classify and route these alert types differently, with clear criteria for when an operational event becomes a security concern, such as when it coincides with suspicious access or privilege changes. This creates a cleaner queue and improves focus, which supports both speed and sustainability. When the SOC's attention is protected, its decisions become sharper and more consistent. Sustainable alert response also includes setting realistic quality expectations and training to those expectations, because a process is only as strong as the habits people can perform repeatedly. Quality expectations might include what evidence must be checked before closing an alert, what documentation must be captured, and what conditions require escalation. Training should reinforce not only technical understanding, but also the reasoning pattern, so analysts learn to validate hypotheses, use context, and avoid jumping to conclusions. It also helps to teach common misunderstandings, such as assuming that a single anomaly is automatically malicious or assuming that a familiar account is always safe. Coaching and review cycles are part of sustainability because they prevent drift, especially as teams grow and new people join. Beginners often think process is restrictive, yet process is what enables consistent quality across different levels of experience. When quality expectations are clear and achievable, the SOC can maintain steady performance rather than swinging between overreaction and neglect. As we close, keep the central idea in mind that timely, manageable, and sustainable alert response is not a single trick, but a set of practices that reinforce each other into a stable operating system. Timeliness comes from realistic time expectations, clear decision points, reversible early actions, and the ability to handle surges without losing control of the queue. Manageability comes from clean intake, consistent triage, clear ownership, strong documentation, and thoughtful separation of alert types, so analysts focus on what truly requires security judgment. Sustainability comes from controlling volume through better detections and enrichment, respecting human attention with clear alert communication, and running feedback loops that turn outcomes into continual improvement. When these practices are in place, the SOC stops feeling like it is chasing an endless stream and starts feeling like it is running a disciplined decision pipeline that protects the organization reliably. For exam purposes, the most important takeaway is that effective alert response is designed, measured, and improved, not improvised under pressure. When you can explain these best practices as an integrated system, you are thinking like someone who can run security operations that hold up over time.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit BareMetalCyber.com.